Here we go. All right, welcome. Here's what we're going to try and do today. This is sort of similar to a previous video I did. This is, I guess, the second installment in a set of videos where I purchased something that used to be expensive and now isn't due to either a mechanical flaw or somebody being stupid. And I do a little bit of work and try and get it back into working order. In this case, we have this Rokinon 24-70 f2.8 continuous aperture camera lens for Sony E-mount. These had what I would consider to be a from the factory issue with durability, where the plastic adapter, plastic mount for the rear lens bayonet mount had some plastic standoffs which were very weak, and this is an incredibly heavy lens, and what would happen is people would be using it and the standoffs that held the bayonet mount on would just snap and the lens would fall off, leading to either damage to the lens or damage to some internal component, as the bayonet mount snapped off and wreaked havoc on the internals. So we're going to take this one apart, see what's wrong with it, and see if I can do anything about it. The actual disassembly process is pretty simple. I've already done most of it. There's 4 screws on the back here by the lens mount. So you pop this off, and be aware at this point there's going to be a ribbon cable on the side with the pins connected over here. It's going to be connected in there. Just be sure to pop that out with a flathead or something. Apply even pressure to both sides wherever you can, so you don't just pull it out at an angle, and don't pull straight up. That'll cause you issues. Unfortunately, if you've already experienced this problem with the mounting points snapping, you've probably lost your opportunity to go through this process in a smooth and controlled manner, as when this separates from this, it will either rip this ribbon cable here, or it will rip out the connector on the board underneath it. So if that's the case, then you're good. You can skip this step. Next, there's going to be 4 more screws, 1, 2, 3, 4 underneath. Just remove those as well. Those are going into this plastic housing. So pop that off, and you will have to remove another flat ribbon cable before you do this. This is the one that controls this side switch, the mode switch. So just make sure you have that disconnected before you try and pick it up. Otherwise, it's going to probably not rip it, but it will separate the adhesive on this back side, and it's probably a little annoying to get that back in the way it's supposed to be once you've done that. Now you're down to sort of the main part of the lens, or at least the main part where damage occurs. First thing we're going to do is pop out these ribbon cables. These all are a pressure fit, so you have, just point at them here, you've got one. This is the one that connects to the front lens mount, so you already removed that, or it removed itself unceremoniously. This one has nothing connected to it. I believe this was for testing at the factory or something similar. This one, which is running down the other side of the lens, and then this very small one, which connects in sideways, that's the one we disconnected when we removed the rear body portion that covers this rear section of the lens. That's for the mode switch, or the custom button switch. So once you've removed all of these, they have a helpful little hole in them. You can get like a pin or a hook through there just to pull them backwards. These have the holes on the sides. This has a hole in the middle. Once you've removed those tabs, there is a sort of final step here where you have to remove 1, 2, 3 more screws. 1, 2, 3. Once those are removed, you can just take this off. The very small screws going down into the plastic here. That may have sustained damage as well. Now that I have this off, you can see, very clearly where the problem is. This standoff here, damaged. This standoff, damaged / partially missing. This standoff is damaged. This standoff is damaged. This standoff is damaged. Essentially, they're all ruined. So all 4 of these ones that and one of the ones that actually doesn't connect to the front lens mount. This is just a poor design in the first place. It's shocking that they didn't rectify this after putting a few of these out. It's unfortunate because the rest of the internals of the lens are actually this beautifully, milled aluminum, super robust, which is part of why this is so heavy. And then the part of the lens that sustains the most torque, which would be the lens mount, is made out of a cheap injection molded plastic. Just means that if you know how to do this, you might be able to secure one cheaply and do a repair similar to this. If I can repair it, let's find out. The first part of the repair is going to be figuring out what's wrong with it, because at this point nothing works. And then the next part is going to be repairing that part, whether it's electrical, and then the last part is going to be, once I have all the electronics working, is going to be rebuilding this section here so that it can be mounted securely to the lens mount. All right, I'll just quickly mention, as you're taking that bayonet mount off, there are going to be two sort of flat metal washers, partial circles. They look like that, and then the weather stripping O-ring that goes on the back there. Just remove those as well. Again, they may have been automatically removed when your lens snapped in half, so if that's the case, don't worry about it. I'm 90% sure the problem lies within this connector right here. The reason I say that is I can see that this has been separated. There's a bit of plastic here that's snapped off, and I believe probably what has happened is when the lens broke off from the bayonet mount, that ribbon cable, which was stuck in here, pulled hard vertically upwards and snapped the housing. I've seen this happen before, and I've seen it worse actually. Usually it'll pull the whole connector off the board. When that happens, you have to do a pretty sophisticated repair. Hoping this one's a little bit simpler, so we will find out. Yeah, look at that, it just fell off. So first things first, make this a little easier for myself, and I'm going to glue this piece back on, hopefully making it so that it stays in place while I try and test the rest of it. Obviously some caution has to be taken here. If you apply glue incorrectly, what you're going to do is you're going to just end up screwing up your contact points, and you're going to render your ribbon cable and this connector completely useless. So don't do that, I guess. So I've applied some glue just to the seam on the top side of that connector where the plastic snapped off. Don't need much, just enough to hold it in place. So since this connector is snapped, the first thing I need to figure out is whether any of these connections to the board are actually dead now. So in my experience, the best way to figure that out is to check continuity between these pins in the connector for the actual lens. So these 10 or 12 or whatever they are, technically it's 10 and then 2 of them are unused. That's interesting. You can ask Sony about that one. These 10 pins, just make sure that they actually have continuity with the board. I sort of took the opportunity earlier to map out what these pins on the back here correspond to. They seem to have these little test points on the board, very tiny, and each of them corresponds with one of the outputs or inputs, I guess, on this connector. So you can test from these pins to these pins on the back to check that you're getting a constant signal between the lens mount and the control board here. So get this plugged in. Well, okay, That's something that can happen for sure. Remember how I was saying sometimes the whole board snaps off of the connector? Well, here is the connector, and here is the board. So, lesson learned. I wish somebody had warned me about that. Now I'm going to have to do something really annoying, which is I'm going to have to route every single one of these pins to its respective contact point on the back of this board, and that's going to be a nightmare. Might record that and then I'll explain what I did later, but I'm not looking forward to it. Cut to the future when my soldering iron is warmed up. Alright, so here we go. We're getting into it now. Soldering iron is waking up. I'm referring to a document I found online that has a sort of basic description of the pinout for these Sony E-mount lenses for these 10 pins here that actually get used. I'm now going to just solder this very thin wire in different colors onto each of these pins, each of the 10 that got used, except for the first and third one. And those are going to be soldered together as they're both effectively just grounded. So I don't need to run an extra wire for that. So I'm going to do that quickly. Quickly. And then we'll see what we can do from there. At this point, I have this teeny little piece of, if that'll ever focus, probably not. I think that's beyond the minimum focus distance. This tiny piece of orange, I'm just going to connect the first and third pins together so that they can both be grounded. Now I'm going to move on to number 4 here. Okay, we did it. I'll just show you here. So we've soldered all these on. I'm just going to check continuity real quick, then I'll cut these a little bit shorter, then we'll move on to the other side, which would be the actual board itself. I'll just go from here to the end of the wire, make sure it does this. Yep. Good, so that means it's good. And I'll do all of them, and then we'll move on. Alright, so before we move on here, I'm just going to use some nail polish to coat these connections, just so that they're a little bit insulated. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but this is something that I have on hand, and this is not a high-effort project. So we're just going to toss some matte clear coat nail polish on there. Thought about doing red, but I think that might be a little too flashy, so we're going to stick with this. That looks gorgeous. Now we are going to go to the board side of things. Alright, so on the board side of things, we have this here, circuit board. This is the place where the connector used to be, right there. And if you check the back side of it, you can see all these little pins. Now, I have taken the liberty to do all of the work to figure out which of these pins correspond with which of the pins inside of the flex cable connector here on this side. So I'll probably toss a diagram up on screen that has them labeled in the number order of the pins on the bayonet mount. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to dab a little bit of solder onto each of these important contact points. Alright, so I'm just going to dab a little bit of flux on there. By a little, I mean a lot. Oopsie. And now I'm going to add some solder. Alright, it really does not get much easier than that. So now I have a little dab of solder on each of these points here, assuming they're in focus. I'm now going to cut these cables here to a shorter length, and I'm going to solder them onto their appropriate connection points. Now I'm going to actually be soldering these. I think it's gonna suck real bad, but hopefully it's something that works out. I guess we'll find out. So this last one's a bit tricky. This last yellow lead here, I have it in yellow, has to be soldered to the side of a resistor, which is on the back here. It doesn't have its own little testing pad. It was the one place where I found like perfect continuity between the front and back side of the board. That's where I'm going to solder it. I'll label it in a drawing so you can see it a little bit better, but I'm just going to do it here. I assume it'll be really hard to see, but that's okay. Alright, so at this point you have these all connected here. You have them all connected here. Technically this should just be able to fold over as one piece, and you would have a functioning board to put in your camera or your lens. But a little bit more work has to be done here, so I'm going to add a little bit more of that enamel coating to the back side of this, just to protect those connectors. Yeah, I'll coat it and then we'll test it. Alright, so I'm going to do a bit of a crime here. I wouldn't recommend you do this, but then again, I wouldn't recommend you do any of this. The plan is I'm going to mount this into my Alpha 7 III via the rear mount. Then I'm going to put it sort of near the back of the lens here and plug in the ribbon cables and just see if I can get some action out of the lens and have it recognized. I'm going to worry about plugging in these two ribbon connectors, this one and this one, but I'm not going to worry about the one that controls the mode switch. We're just going to skip that one for now because honestly it's not that important to me, and chances are if the rest of this stuff works, that's going to be just fine. Again, you should never do this, not ever. It's a horrible thing to do to your camera, or it puts your camera at serious risk of having horrible things done to it. We're just going to put this in here. Contacts line up here. Yep, so that'll just pop in. And I'm going to take a knife as the most sophisticated tool I have here. I'm just going to rotate that around until it clicks. So right now, I have secured this. Technically, we have a lens connected. We'll just see what that does. Any magic smoke? Nope, not yet. That's a good start, I guess. Now I'll bring over my lens body, and we will try and plug in some of these connectors. It's the shutter closing because it's afraid. Just gonna use a SD card to prop this up a bit. Alright, so we got one of those plugged in. Just want to get this other one in. Alright, so both ribbon cables are now plugged in, and this is technically connected. Now you can't see this, but I'm watching the aperture change, which is a very good sign. Again, I just wanted to make it incredibly clear how much I recommend not doing this, but if you look here at that number, I can now change the aperture. Yep, narrower all the way from f2.8 to f22. So that's promising. Next thing to do is going to be to finalize some of that stuff we just put together. You know, finish off some of the solder joints with a little bit more nail polish so she's nice and pretty. And make sure I can fit everything back into the lens body, tuck it all away, screw it back together. We should have a lens. Only problem is the mechanical component, but we'll get to that in a second. So let's get the electronics finished up first. Alright, so here's where things get really wacky. I have to replace something on here to make this a stable connection between the lens body and the lens mount. So here's what I've come up with. There's these 4 standoffs, 1, 2, 3, 4, that are all completely clapped. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut them off, at least mostly cut them off, and then I'm going to heat sink these brass standoffs into it. I think these are M2, I believe. Yeah, M2. So I'm going to sink these M2 standoffs into it so that I have these brass mounting points, and then hopefully, maybe with some glue, possibly, a little bit of additional modification, I should be able to get this to a point where those are strong enough to hold the weight of the lens. I guess we'll find out. So I'm going to start working through that process. It looks like the standoffs themselves are supposed to be about 6 millimeters. So you're trying to get about 6 millimeters off the body of the lens. With a little bit of plastic left over underneath them, these should be pretty solid for the job. These little baby things. Alright, let's give it a go. I'm going to now try and set them down into this material here best I can. Ow. Wow, those get hot really quick. Who could have seen that coming? So we'll just put them like this. And with time and heat, they should just sit themselves right down in there. Well, there's one of them, man. It looks okay. Let's just see if we can do the rest. Make sure that gets down deep enough. And make sure it's straight up. Yeah, I'm going to do the other 2 of these and then I will rejoin you momentarily. If you need a guide to know exactly where to land these, you can put this outer body piece back on and then you can see exactly how they line up with the holes here. Just make sure that they're flush with the plastic surface here and that they're also right in the center. Alright, so now I've used heat and a little bit of persuasion to get these all into the right places. They seem pretty sturdy. I'm just going to add a little bit of super glue to them just to make sure that they don't go anywhere. Be 100% sure it's solid, and then I think I should be able to start the reassembly process just to test if this is strong enough to actually hold. Alright, so this is the annoying part. You are first going to have to insert this through this collar here before putting the board back on, otherwise there's no way to get it through again. Easiest way I've found is to sort of inset it like this to give you a bit more room to play with. Now you can set this back down onto the body of the lens and reinsert the ribbon cables. One of the most difficult parts here is going to be getting the cable for the switch on the side back in. You can see there. It just has to be inserted through there, just pushed into its little slide. You can do that with some tweezers or something. It's a bit finicky, but it can be done. So now that that's in, just make sure the rest of the board is pushed in properly. In my case, I'm not even going to use the three small screws that hold the board onto the internal plastic piece. One, because they don't really do much. Two, because I can't reach them when reassembling in this manner. And then three, because they already stripped out of the plastic, so there's pretty much no point. We're just going to have to rely on the pressure of this fit to hold it in place. I'm not that worried about it. We'll see. Now we're going to reinsert the screws that hold this outer body onto the lens. If you are good at this, you'll have all the screws. There should be 3 of them. I have 2, so I will be using 2 unless I can find a replacement. As you're reassembling this, don't forget to put back in these 2 sort of metal shims that go in here, and then also your weather sealing gasket, which has to sit just underneath the lens mount here. Alright, finally, once you've gotten all that seated, you just take your screws, the 4 you have left, mount them in the 4 holes here, and you'll be good to go. You have a functioning lens again, I think, depending on how you did this and how well you did it. But I'm rooting for you. Just give me a second and I'll test this one out. Just make sure everything works. You can see. Turn the aperture down. Autofocus works. There you go. Look at that, focusing. Looks good. Just take a picture of those screwdriver bits over there and we'll see how it looks. Good. Look at that. Nice and sharp. So we're gonna call it a day. Looks good. Anyways, if you've run into the semi-common but also rather niche problem where your Rokinon or Samyang 24-70 f2.8 lens snaps in half, this is a way to fix it.